When dealing with the non-price determinants of supply, we change supply, which means we're going to shift the curve and make an entirely new supply curve. Just as in demand, if you remember I said don't start drawing arrows up and down, an increase in supply means an up arrow because that's incorrect. You want to increase to the right and decrease to the left. So when we increase supply, we would draw an arrow to the right and draw a supply 2 curve out to the right. To decrease supply, we draw an arrow to the left and draw our second supply curve to the left. Some of you may be thinking, well, that doesn't look right. The shifting supply to the left appears that it's above it, just like I said with the up arrows. It seems like over here it's actually increasing supply, and that I must be crazy for drawing that as a decrease in supply. But if we look over and let's say this is $2, and I draw across, I've created two quantities, where we originally started and when we shifted supply increasing. Now, supplying would indicate supplying more products. An increase in supply, supply more products. So at $2 at our first supply curve before we increased it, let's say this is 4 units. Now I told you shifting to the right increases supply. So at $2 at the same price, we now have a greater quantity, which indicates an increase in supply. Now if I did the same thing on the decreasing supply curve to the left, you'll notice that as well, quantity has decreased when price has stayed the same. So it does shift to the right to increase supply, shift to the left to decrease supply. The non-price determinants can be summed up in the acronym TENTing. The T stands for taxes and subsidies. More taxes on businesses, less supply. More subsidies, which means the government giving money to businesses, means that they can supply more goods. So this is similar to in demand when we talked about the income. Taxes are income being taken out of businesses. Subsidies usually are money that's put into businesses so they can supply more units. Expectations for the future, very similar to in demand. If a firm expects that prices will rise in the future, they'll decrease supply now so they can, for the same number of goods, get a higher price per unit and maximize their profit better. So expectations for the future, if the price is going to go up in the future, you would decrease supply now to take advantage of the higher price and increase your supply at a later date. The number of sellers, pretty simple. The more number of firms there are, the more that is able to be supplied to the marketplace. So more bakers means more baked goods supplied at every price because there's more people working than there were before. Ceteris paribus, of course. The second T is for technology. Basically, better technology means more productivity and more supply. So if you have better machines, chances are you can produce more goods given the same amount of input. Again, ceteris paribus. More technology, ceteris paribus, increase in supply. Input prices. If the cost of materials rises, firms cannot supply as much. So let's pretend we're building a car and you need steel to build the car. If the price of steel goes up, for the same amount of money as before, you can purchase as the firm less steel. If you don't have enough steel, you have to decrease the supply of your cars because you don't have enough to make the same amount of cars as before because you could afford less. Natural disasters can disrupt delivery system, destroy resource and materials, and generally disrupt supply. So whenever there's a natural disaster, usually having to do with weather, it's a decrease in supply. The last one is government regulations, meaning that the more rules and regulations set forth by government, the more costly to businesses and thus less supply. Given one example, given it's probably outlandish, let's say I'm producing lemonade. The government comes up with a rule and regulation that says if you produce lemonade, you must perform 20 push-ups before you can make 1 pitcher of lemonade. So if I'm sitting out on the corner trying to sell my lemonade, if I'm going to follow the rules, I have to do 25 push-ups and then make a pitcher of lemonade. Do 25 push-ups, make a pitcher of lemonade. And it slows my supply down. It slows how much I'm able to produce. Now, sure, I could go off and hire more workers, but, ceteris paribus, keeping everything else the same, if the only change is that I now must perform 25 push-ups to make 1 pitcher, it slows down production therefore decreasing supply.